Thought about calling this the Poor Man's Podcast.
Why is that?
I don't know. It just sounds good. And also because a lot of podcasts, for what I've heard, they interview well-known people. So they're kind of like, you know, if the biggest podcast in the world right now is Joe Rogan's podcast, but he interviews like the most famous people he can find, which makes sense.
Yeah.
But you don't get to relate to those people on, you have no idea what it's like to live as,
Kanye West. Right.
It's not really
It's
relevant.
another level, yeah.
So the Poor Man's Podcast would be, I always like meeting people and talking to people and
telling stories.
telling stories, but also if you tell us, I found that if you tell a story, generally the other person tells a story to match it. And I love hearing stories. So if I get into kind of a conversation with someone and I tell them a little short story about something, they're generally like, well, this happened to me.
Yeah.
And the stories you hear from,
Ordinary
everyday,
people.
ordinary people, some of them are absolutely incredible. Like we stayed at a guy's house in Florida at a church, and his name escapes me, the Evans, right? Yeah, the Evans. And we had stayed with them for 2 years. We played their church, spend the night at their house afterwards.
Do you want to introduce the fact that you do play music?
Yes, I am in a band. This is on the Kempters YouTube channel. So if you see any other video, it is a music video.
Yeah.
Generally. And the point for this video is to tell the story of why I play bass left-handed.
Right. So you're at this guy's
So
house.
anyways, I met this guy. We were at this
you think regular church person, real nice.
real nice
family.
Sweet old couple. And I noticed in his house he had a lot of pictures of, aviation and flying certificates, whatever. I don't know. It's just a lot of aviation stuff. So on the way back from church one night, the last time we'd stayed with him, I asked him, I said, did you fly? Were you a pilot? And he was like, yeah, I was a pilot in the Air Force, and I, was in such and such squadron at this Air Force base that was local, and I have flown pretty much everything. And I was like, really? That's awesome. I was like, what is the most interesting thing you've ever flown? And one thing leads to another, and he ended up being the pilot who went to pick up the Iranian hostages, or the hostages during the Iranian hostage crisis in the 80s, I think, when the Iranians stormed the embassy the U.S. embassy in Iran. He was the guy
that helped the hostages escape.
Well, that flew the plane to pick up the hostages.
Crazy.
And had, firsthand story of...
Almost weren't able to leave.
Yeah, he just spent the whole day thinking he was not going to make it out. And that was a story that, because I've always been fascinated with the military and, stuff in that regard, that hostage situation was fascinating to me.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it was also, there's not many times that a U.S. citizen has been taken hostage by a foreign power,
right?
And or terrorists. And this guy was there.
Yeah.
So that kind of storytelling.
So you're here today then to tell one of your more interesting stories and let the people get to know you a little better.
Yeah, because a lot of people have seen us, and a lot of people have asked us questions and wondered why I play
bass left-handed.
Or not necessarily why I play bass left-handed, because most people don't know or are not really curious as to why. They
They don't even know
They
that
just
it's the
notice
wrong
that
direction.
I play left-handed,
Oh, okay.
if they even notice.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh wow, that's cool. You're a left-handed bass player,"
Mm.
and that's rare.
Yes.
It's very rare because there's only two basses in Guitar Center that are even left-handed that you can go play. So going to a music store is super boring to me.
They do actually have those there?
Yeah, they're terrible. They're short scale Ibanez. They're like
Yikes.
$300. They're absolutely terrible.
We're not knocking Ibanez.
I am.
Okay.
Their bass
I'm
level
not
guitars are
responsible for this.
they're trash.
Allegedly.
100%. They're trash. I do not like them. Anyways, so to start off the story, I am not left-handed.
No.
I am very much right-handed. I do nothing left-handed.
Yeah.
But play the bass.
Yeah.
The reason I play left-handed is because I cut my fingers off on my left hand when I was 16. The reason I only have four fingers in this hand, or 3 fingers, one
Kind of
thumb.
like 3.5.
I got 3.5. Yeah, the thumb was cut off almost completely. It is bent permanently bent in that way. I have about that much motion in it. Top joint is completely fused. The bottom joint has limited motion. My ring finger is completely gone. There was nothing left in the accident. And my pinky is it's missing the lower joint and is also fused. The top joint does not work either. So it's just kind of a stick.
Straight stick. half a pinky.
Which during the recovery, I would stab that into things. Because you're used to
being able to bend it.
You're used to your pinky just kind of being there.
Getting out of the way when it needs to get out
of the way. When it needs to. It would not get out of the way at first. I'd walk around and just stub it into things. It's terrible. So I cut it off on a table saw.
Yeah, that sounds very horrific.
Yeah, I cut my hand in a table saw. I was 16 years old. I grew up in a cabinet shop. My dad had a custom kitchen cabinet shop. Before that, sold birdhouses all over the United States. And
a lot of woodworking.
I grew up around woodworking. Grew up in the cabinet shop. And I loved it. I absolutely love woodworking. I would go out to the shop even after working a full day in the shop. I would go out after late at night and work for hours.
Do your own little projects.
Yeah, do my own little projects. I would make my own toys because my parents told me. I remember it very distinctly. I think I was like 7 years old. I came up to my parents. Right about the time you start becoming cognizant of things and your want of things.
Yeah, what other people have. Like, oh,
other people have things,
can
and
I
you're
have
like,
one of those?
yeah, like you become a problem.
Yeah, at the
in
grocery
Walmart.
store. Yeah.
Right about the time I was becoming a problem at Walmart, or I was getting to that age, I was like, hey, can you buy me, that toy sword?
Of course.
And my parents looked at me like I was crazy and were like, no, just go make it. I was like, what do you mean go make it?
Quite a precedent.
My dad was like, yeah, just go make it. You want a sword? Go make it.
Did you know how to use any tools?
No.
At that age or anything?
No, I had no clue.
So you had to
how
figure
to use
out from scratch, like.
No, the first thing he showed me is he took me out. He was building our house at that point in time, and he was at the stage of the insulation, so the blue foam board insulation that he was nailing up on the outside of the house. So he had sheets and scraps of it laying around. So he went out with like a pen, just kind of traced out the shape of a sword, and took it to a scroll saw and just cut it out. And it was like magic. I was like, what?
A foam sword.
You can do that? So I made like 12 foam swords that day. Broke them.
Did you even know how to use the scroll saw?
Not really, but it was.
But you watched him do it.
Yeah,
How old were you?
I think it was like 7.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I
Uh,
can't relate.
Yeah, so he gave me some pointers. Scroll saws, it's kind of like the first tool kid gets to use.
Okay.
If you put them in that. I mean, granted, I was raised a little differently than a lot of kids.
Yes.
So my parents did not really believe in sheltering me that much from things that would seem dangerous to other people.
You were a hazard then?
I would like run around in the shop as a toddler with like 2 butcher knives, scare customers to death. I was like Chucky running around.
They're like, we're going to read in the news that this kid didn't make it tomorrow.
Yeah. And my parents didn't think anything. I was like, what? And the customers are losing their mind. I'm running around with 2 butcher knives. So he showed me how to use the scroll saw. Well, I discovered quickly that you couldn't really sword fight because I immediately armed all of my siblings with foam swords and we were fighting in the backyard, having sword fights. But the problem was you hit a foam sword once and it just snaps in half.
Yeah, that's
So
a lot of foam swords.
Yeah, I was burning through foam swords. I was spending more time cutting foam swords than I was getting to play
playing.
with them.
Yeah.
So I graduated up to wooden swords. And those lasted a lot longer.
Okay.
And then I quickly got over wanting to play with them so much. And I wanted to make my really janky looking wooden sword, I wanted it to look good.
So you started enjoying the art of just making things more than playing. That was like your recreation at that point.
Not quite not at the beginning.
Okay.
I still loved playing with stuff because I was like 8 years old.
Right.
So
A boy.
We'd always played, dress up and go out in the woods and act like Lord of the Rings and all this stuff.
Thought you were going to say Star Wars.
Star Wars too. Star Wars before Lord of the Rings. But I started striving more and more to make the swords look good. And it was also my dad challenging me because I would make my little masterpiece or what I thought was my masterpiece and bring it in and he would look at it and go, yeah, I mean, that's all right, but you could do this, this, and this and make it better.
Nice.
So everything was a challenge. So it was
Right.
always a challenge to make my creation
Impressive to your dad.
impressive to my dad, which was hard. He was not
sure.
impressed by a single thing. He was very talented woodworker. So I very shortly just started spending hours and hours in the shop. That was what I did for fun. Go out at night. As soon as it gets dark, I'd be out in the shop until 1, 2 in the morning making swords and all this stuff. Well, it got to the point within, I would say, 2 or 3 years that I would make a sword or a gun, a little flintlock wooden pistol or something, and I would bring it to my dad, and my dad would buy it from me because he didn't want me to destroy it by playing with it.
Nice.
Because it looked so good.
So that meant he was impressed, right?
Yeah, that's started. He would like give me $100 for whatever it was,
So
and
that you
then
wouldn't
save it.
tear it up.
And I now have like I've got that whole collection back, and it's crazy to think that as like a 12-year-old I was doing that. And it was kind of the ground. It laid the groundwork for what I do now in my own business. But so I did that, had a love for woodworking, literally spent all the free time I had doing it. And
so like age 15 and 16, or how old were you when you cut your hand? Which one?
16, I was almost 17.
So like what were your interests in the shop at that point? Because obviously you were trying to make something.
My interests I of course had stopped playing with, the items.
That you were making?
I wasn't out playing with the guns or anything that I was making anymore. I was trying to make realistic guns at that point.
Wow.
I was trying to make something that you could not tell the difference between a wooden gun or a real gun.
So an exact
yeah,
replica.
I started like sculpting.
That's crazy. Yeah.
And so I was working on, my dad had a Browning high power. And I was working on a exact scale Browning high power that the clip from the original gun would actually, or the magazine of the original gun would fit in the wooden gun.
So you could play with that.
Well, I would never play with it.
Yeah.
It was so detailed and so,
Wow.
I spent so much time on it that it was
Wow.
just going to go up on a shelf or something and be able to look at it. So when I was 16, it was May 5th, Cinco de Mayo.
Cinco de Mayo.
Not a good time to injure oneself.
Because everyone's injuring themselves.
Everyone is in the hospital on that day.
Okay.
So the context of that day was my great uncle and aunt from California who had never met any of us kids.
Okay.
My dad's uncle were visiting us for the first time.
First time ever.
First time ever. They'd never been to Alabama that I am aware of. No. Had never been to our house. And our uncle, he was a stockbroker, financial something.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Lives on a mountain in San Diego, outside of San Diego, has a mansion.
Wow.
I mean, very rich, well-off dude. He was visiting.
Okay.
And he was trying to, we didn't know it at that point in time, but he was trying to canvass the extended family to see where he was going to give our dad's grandmother's cello. He wanted it to be, placed in the family somewhere where someone, a young person, would be able to use it.
Yeah.
And we did not know this, but we had just
You didn't know that's why he was visiting.
Yeah, we didn't know why that was.
Did your parents know that?
I don't know. I think he
not.
explained it kind of. He was only there for 3 days or 2 days, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And he was there doing it, but he was kind of secretly, interviewing everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we had gone to the music store a week before they arrived.
Wow. So music was brand
music
spanking
was not
new.
even, yeah.
It wasn't even music.
It was not music. It was torturing the cats. And each one of us kids almost all of us had bought an instrument.
Mm-hmm.
Because we were, I don't know. It's still foggy as to why.
As to why
we did that. We were playing tennis at the time. We were very highly ranked in tennis. We were well known in the state for tennis.
Yeah.
A few of us were planning on going pro. We have a tennis court in our yard.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we did. That was what us kids did, was play tennis.
Yeah.
So it was more like a little hobby, because tennis used to be the hobby and now tennis wasn't the hobby. Tennis was the job. So we went, bought the instruments, and a week later our uncle showed up.
Mm-hmm.
So we had this, we didn't play. You can imagine a week into a kid having an instrument, there
are no notes
there's nothing
coming from that instrument.
There's nothing. Okay. So we were goofing around. We were super excited about this thing. Well, my uncle comes, and my parents were going to take my, Uncle Denny and Aunt Judy out to dinner.
Okay.
And the Shakespeare Festival.
Okay.
That night. And I was going to babysit all the kids. Well.
Oh my.
Yeah. So they go out to dinner. We're, doing whatever we were doing. I can't remember what it was, but we were cleaning up the kitchen after dinner or something. And I was like, all right, well, I'm going to go out to the shop for a minute, and I'll be back in a little bit.
Okay.
So I go out to the shop. It's 8:30.
Which, your siblings are used to you doing that routine every night, right?
Yeah, I was gone all the time. I was always in the shop. So I'm out playing around, trying to work on this grip for this brand new high power I was making. And I was using black and white ebony for the grips, which it was only a block that was probably an inch by 6 inches long, very small. But black and white ebony comes in, the heartwood of ebony is pitch black. It's pretty black.
Okay.
The sapwood is white. So on the edge of where you get sap and hardwood or heartwood mixed together, it looks like marble.
That sounds pretty.
It's very pretty, but it's very volatile. So
Okay.
it comes dipped in a really thick coat of wax. And as soon as you trim all of that off to start actually doing something with it, the wood just warps very, very bad in the space of like 20 minutes.
So then why were you using it?
Well, you trim it off, you let it move, you trim it off again, you do it a couple times, and then you're finally left with where it's going to end up.
Oh.
So,
Had you worked with it before?
yeah.
Okay.
So I was going to cut the piece of wood and mirror the different steps on either side and then split it up the middle and then fold it around and use it on opposite sides of the grip. So there would be a mirrored grain on either side.
Wow.
The only problem was that I didn't think through
How you're going to make
the
that
steps.
happen. Okay.
Because 2 of the steps had to be all the way across one side. So I would just cut a little groove in one side, lower the blade, move the fence out a little bit, cut another deeper groove into it. So there was like little stair steps on the side of the piece. Well, one top corner needed a little arch cut in it. So I pushed the block into the table saw blade, probably like an inch, and then pulled it back out.
Okay.
And it had a nice little curve cut in it. And I got that fitted right, that was all good. But now I needed to put the curve on the other side of the block. The only way I could figure out how to do that was put the block on the back side of the blade and pull it towards me.
Oh, my.
Which is like rule number 1
Never do that.
of what you don't do on a table saw.
Ever.
Literally ever. And I'm not really sure why I did it. Like,
you were just
the
too
thought,
confident, like in your skills, or?
No, because that's not a skill. I have no idea what I was
You were
thinking.
trying to take a shortcut? It was
not even a shortcut. I don't understand why because I'm very careful.
Yeah.
I'm a pretty careful person.
Right. You're not clumsy like me.
I'm not clumsy. I literally never hurt myself on any tool in the shop up until that time, and since that time,
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah.
Not even a little cut. Like I literally have never hurt myself.
Well, this made up for all of those.
Yeah,
missed.
this covered all of it. So I was sitting there thinking about that little cut, and I just went and I just made the cut. And I pulled it out and I checked it on my calipers, and I wasn't thinking. It was like I should never have done the first thing. And it was a 32nd of an inch too small.
Were you just in a hurry because of the material you were using? You're like, I got to do this fast for it before it settles, or?
It had already settled.
Okay.
And so I just picked the piece up and I put it on the back side of the blade, and all he needed to take off was a 32nd of an inch. I mean,
wow,
it's not much.
Minuscule.
So I'm moving it in. Well, the piece is only like an inch wide, and it's kind of a little bit tippy because I've already cut the steps on the other side. So the only part that's touching the fence is the top edge of the block and the middle of the block. So it's not real stable.
Yeah.
So as I'm pulling it towards me, I'm like, all right, well, I'm getting close. So I put my left thumb on the back side of the block to kind of stabilize it, and then it disappeared.
Oh, jeez. Wait, the block disappeared, or your hand, or both?
All of it.
Everything.
I've never been focusing very hard on something in my life, and it just disappeared.
Wow.
That's how fast it jerked. The block, it as soon as the blade touched that block, the block just disappeared.
It's gone.
Along with my hands.
Yeah.
This hand went between the blade and the fence completely. And
it's a miracle it wasn't.
Yeah, the blade was only, an inch from the fence, and it just went right through.
Wow.
Didn't touch it.
Lucky.
This hand went directly through the blade. It cut my thumb off. It disintegrated because my hand was bent like this, like this on the backside. Because I was just holding the backside of the blade.
Wow.
Backside of the block.
Yeah.
So it hit this bent up finger here.
Yeah, that's the main path of the...
The main path of the blade went right through here, and then hit the backside of this pinky that was curled up too. And I didn't have any pain from it. It didn't register any kind of pain. So this hand went up behind my back, and I kind of tweaked my shoulder. So and it felt like I got hit in the stomach.
Oh, that's weird. Yeah. You thought the block maybe hit you in the stomach, or...
Well, I knew my arm had hit me in the stomach. My left hand had hit me in the stomach, and it
pretty hard
knocked me back a couple feet and knocked the wind out of me. And I still was not aware that I had cut my hand. And I shook my I started shaking my hands like this because it jams your wrist when you snap so hard.
Yeah.
And I've had stuff kick back on the table saw, and it does. It just pops your wrist really hard.
Oh my goodness.
So I shook my hands like this to kind of loosen my wrist up, and I stopped because
you knew at that point something was wrong.
I was aware that something was wrong.
Oh no!
Because the nerves on your hands are still there. Like I can still feel this ring finger.
Weird.
Like it's there. Like if I'm not looking, if I close my eyes,
you think that it's there.
Close my eyes, I can still feel something underneath my fingernail.
Phantom pain.
Yeah. And all of the feeling was still there in its appropriate places. But the actual fingers were not where they were supposed to be. And it immediately...
Oh, that's weird.
My thumb was sitting... When I looked down, my thumb was sitting like this. Just pointed completely backwards, laying on top of my hands.
Ugh.
But because of that, it felt like I had 8 fingers.
Oh, because they were all spliced in half.
I had 3 fingers that were cut and laying on my hand in other places where they weren't supposed to be.
Weird.
Which was the strangest feeling that I had experienced.
And this is all, you're processing it super
This was
quickly.
all like was all like half of a second. And I shook my hands. I was like, "What?" And I looked down, and my thumb was going in the other direction, just blood everywhere. This finger was exploded. It was not there anymore.
Yeah, it
was hamburger meat. And I remember I kind of yelled because it was like an initial shock.
Yeah.
I was like, "Ah!" And then it was over. And then it was like, all right, I got
That was your whole reaction.
That was my
before you had like logical thoughts.
That was my whole reaction before I had logical thought. I was like, okay, now I got to get this fixed. I got to stop this bleeding. So
survival mode kicked in.
Yeah, so I went to the office in the shop, which was right there. I went in, I grabbed the phone, and I was going to call 911. So I picked up the phone, and then I went to dial. Oh, no. And I was like, what am I supposed to do with that? Because these 2 fingers...
Yeah, you could, yeah.
The way my hand looked, I went into surgery seriously thinking that I may have a pointer finger when I got out because I couldn't imagine what they were going to be able to do
with what was left.
With what was there.
Yeah.
It was bad. It was very bad. So I looked at my hand, I looked at the phone, I threw the phone down onto the cradle and went out the shop to go to the house. Well,
Inside. Yeah.
I didn't hang the phone up. I didn't put the phone back on the hook. So the phone was connected by a landline to the house.
Oh, no.
So the phone...
People that have never experienced house phones before that are watching this don't know. Like,
this was before cell phones.
You have one way in and one way out. You may have multiple house phones, but if one is off the hook, you can't
make
a call with the other. You just get the dial tone, the busy busy tone.
Yeah. So I went into the house. And it's pretty amazing the amount of emotions you go through in a situation like that. What, the dog?
The dog's
You can't hear that.
thirsty. Okay.
You can't possibly hear that. Maybe you
Right.
can.
Maybe.
The dog is going to town on the water. But it's amazing how many emotions you go through in a situation
When you're
like
in
that.
shock. Yeah.
I don't know that I was in shock. I don't think I was in shock.
That's what everyone who's in shock says.
I know, but I don't think I was in shock.
Okay.
I immediately was very angry at myself
Okay.
because I realized
What
I
you
was
had
like,
done.
what in the world? That was the dumbest thing I possibly could have done. And now I have
Yeah.
seriously
Worst case
damaged
scenario. Yeah.
my hand.
Yeah.
So I walked in the door, opened the door up. I was still upset, and I kind of yelled to my siblings. I said, call 911. I've trashed my hand. A few of my sisters kind of came into the room, looked at me, and started screaming. And then running in circles.
They did not handle that well.
Like literally just in the living room,
You're just
running
watching
in
them.
circles. And I'm standing there going,
Help.
and they're screaming, and then now they're hysterically crying, and now they're losing their mind. And I'm like,
And Charlie
"Great."
was what, like 1, 2 years
Charlie
old?
was like, Charlie was 2
So she was still a baby.
or 3.
Yeah.
She did not see it because they wouldn't let her come out of the room, which
That's
is a good thing.
That is good.
So this pandemonium is going on in the living room. They couldn't dial 911. I didn't know that the phone was off the hook. I thought that they were so hysterical
that
they
they
could not dial 911 because we had never dialed 911 at our house before. So at this
What's
point,
the number for 911?
yeah, what's the number? How do you dial 911? That was kind of what was going on.
You're like,
And
seriously.
yeah, I was like, are you kidding me?
And
I'm
of
going
course
to bleed to death.
Yeah, of course it'd be the night that your parents were not there.
Yeah, so my parents were.
What
yeah.
terrible luck.
Yeah, it was bad luck. So I finally calmed them down. I told them, go turn off the table saw in the shop.
Oh, it's still running.
It was still running. I hadn't turned it off. I said, go turn the
I
table
don't
saw
know
off.
that they needed to see that bloody massacre.
It was it was
yeah.
pretty horrible from what
Okay.
they said. I told them, go turn the table saw off. I said, stop freaking out. I'm not going to die. I said, I'm going next door to get my grandparents. My grandparents live next door. I'm going next door to get my grandmother to call 911 from her house because you people can't do it. So
Yeah.
I left. I walked across the yard, and as I'm walking up to the front door, I'm like, well, this is the last shot. If they freak out like my siblings freak out, I'm going to die.
Yeah, you'll bleed out. You're
I'll
done
bleed
for.
to
Like,
death.
no one's going to help you.
So I'm going to be real calm about this, and I'm going to walk up, and I'm
Try not to
going
freak
to
'em out.
freak 'em out. So
Okay.
I put my hand behind my back,
Mm.
and I walked up to the front door.
All right.
I walked in the back door, and they were eating dinner. My grandmother looked up, and my grandfather looked up, and my grandmother just gasped. This, horrified gasp. And I was like, can you call 911? I've hurt my hand. Just that calm. And
It's creepy.
yeah, it was kind of creepy looking back on it. And she just jumped up, and ran off to the phone.
Okay.
Well, my grandfather was World War II vet. He
Oh, my.
just looked at me.
And just stared.
He never said anything. He just kind of looked at me. And I was like, all right. So I just turned around and I was going back
you
back
just
across
left?
the yard.
You didn't even know?
No,
like, you
I
just
didn't
assumed
even wait.
she placed the call.
If she didn't place the call, then I was out of luck. So I would start walking. I walk out of the back door, and I'm like, I mean, she really freaked out. I was calm. I think I was calm. And I looked down, and it looked like I had jumped into a swimming pool of blood.
Oh, yeah. I can't imagine. Gross.
I played tennis. I played tennis every day, so I had tennis clothes on, and I had long socks,
Mm-hmm.
like calf length socks,
Yeah.
and tennis shoes.
Mm-hmm.
I had blood in the bottom of my tennis shoes
Whoa.
from that.
Ugh.
And so I got home, back across the yard, got home, and I had one of the girls tie a sock around my wrist.
That's good. Yeah.
But it had already clotted, so it wasn't bleeding anymore,
Wow.
which is amazing.
That is amazing.
One of the main arteries, you have 2 arteries in your thumb, and I had cut one of them completely.
Oh, my.
And it stopped bleeding within a minute.
That's crazy.
Under a minute, it had stopped
It
bleeding.
must have been how you had cut it.
I don't know. It's severed, and it's a problem when it gets cold, but it had stopped bleeding. So the sock really didn't do a whole lot. So I sat at the table looking at my hand for 20 minutes before the ambulance showed up. Ambulance arrived. I walked out to the front door. And I was like, well, here you go.
Mm-hmm.
I did a number on it.
Yeah.
And they panicked. They were all just gasping and
Oh, my goodness.
looking green. And I'm like, this is not a good sign.
No, not when your EMTs can't handle
The EMTs are freaking out.
and don't know what to do.
And they got me a chair, set me down right there in front of the door, and everybody's just running all over the place. And they're freaking out because the first ambulance had no clue what to do. And they were on the phone in a panic trying to call another EMT to get there.
Well, what are they going to do? If the first EMT couldn't do anything?
The first EMTs had no idea what they were doing.
They couldn't just say, like, okay, well, we're just going to take you to the hospital. Like,
no, they were just like, oh, such and such got to get here, such and such got
well,
to get here.
was
Call
it
her,
because your parents weren't there?
No, they just didn't know what to do.
Wow.
They had never seen something like that.
Hicktown.
I don't know what it was.
Backcountry.
Yeah. I
don't see very much.
Yeah. Not Hicktown. Come on, it's Slap-On.
People ride tractors to the local grocery store.
That is a fact.
With their sock and slipper feet. Tractors.
That is a fact.
Okay. Hicktown.
I almost did it.
No, we're not going to talk about such things.
Anyways.
All right, so they're
on
the
waiting
phone
on this
with
lady.
Another EMT.
Yeah, apparently there's another lady who was a lot more skilled and qualified.
Yeah,
I don't
something.
know. Well, she finally showed up.
Oh, my.
They got me set up, with an IV, and they were like, all right, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt. It's going to feel like a big bee sting. And I look over at him, and I look over at this hand. I'm like, yeah, I'm sure it will. And...
You're like,
so they get me hooked up with that, and then the lady shows up, and she's like, wow, okay. So she starts taking my fingers and arranging them.
What?
Like putting them back where they're supposed to go. Like
I guess so they're not permanently.
She took my thumb from over here and straightened it up.
Oh,
and then,
how lovely.
Yeah, and then she took saline solution.
And cleaned it.
Like a gallon of saline solution, and just starts pouring it all over my hand. I'm like, you know what? I've already suffered enough. Why we got to do this? So she's pouring it, and they're like, all right, so we need to get you on a stretcher. And I'm like, come on, people, I've hurt my fingers.
Do you not have a seat in the back of this ride?
So they're like, oh, well, we got to do it. So they...
Well, they're probably worried you were going to pass out eventually from the loss
They
of
were.
blood.
There was a lot of people asking me if I was dizzy or,
and what today was.
Which I never was. I was never dizzy. I never felt queasy at any point in time.
That's probably the adrenaline, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I felt very normal.
Yeah, that's weird.
I was having conversations with, people and talking to them, and I felt completely normal. Well, that didn't help me out later.
Okay.
So we got into the ambulance, and I expected, some morphine or something, because it wasn't feeling great.
I'm sure it wasn't.
I was functioning, but I was, putting a brave face on it. And the lady sits down beside me, opposite me, and she's like, well, I'm really sorry, but we don't really have anything in here to give you.
Because you were a minor, or they just didn't have anything?
They just didn't have anything.
Oh, my goodness.
And she's like, I can give you a pillow.
Wow.
I was like, well, I'll take it. So she hands me like this little pillow, and I like put it on my stomach, and I like lay my hand on the pillow.
So they're not even helping
like
you do
elevate it.
anything.
No, she's
Like,
just sitting there looking at me. And I'm like,
wow.
okay. And she like made small talk. She was a nice lady. Made small talk till we got to the hospital. At this point, it was about an hour from the time I'd cut my hand.
And you're like, now I'm really not going to have this put back together ever.
By the time I got to the hospital, it was about an hour. Well, at that point in time, I realized it was kind of Cinco de Mayo.
Oh.
The hospital was on lockdown.
Why?
There were 5 people dying of gunshot wounds.
Oh, my goodness.
In
this
the
is
hospital.
Montgomery, right?
Montgomery, yeah.
Oh.
There were gangs outside trying to get in. You know, people from different gangs were in the hospital dying from the same gunfight, that kind of stuff.
Oh, my goodness.
And I am sitting in a hallway
Oh, wow.
waiting for someone to look at me for an hour.
An hour after you arrived.
After I arrived, I sat in the hospital, in the emergency room hallway for an hour. Just sitting there. By this time they had wrapped, at the house they'd wrapped my hand with like gauze. So I just had
now
like
is a permanent part of your hand.
I had like a club.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there in the hallway, and I was in a very good mood. I'm not really sure why.
Loss of blood.
I didn't lose that much blood though. It was from the initial thing I, had the, blood get splattered everywhere, but it stopped bleeding, so it wasn't a whole lot. And so I sat in the hospital hallway for an hour. A nurse would walk by, some people would walk by, like, hey, how's it going, And they're like,
which they couldn't see how bad your
they
hand
couldn't
was
see how
because it was
bad
wrapped
my
up.
hand
Well,
was.
that was probably why.
I know. In
cut on his
hindsight, I
hand.
probably should have been freaking out. But
Yeah.
they were just, they'd look at me and they're like, good, how are you? I'm like, I'm doing good.
Not true.
And yeah, that was not true at all. So finally, somebody comes up to me with a clipboard.
Oh, no.
And starts asking me questions. And it was like, they were like, so how old are you? I'm like, well, I'm 16. What did you do? Why are you here?
Like, you came in an ambulance. You should have, like, immediately been triaged when you got there.
You would think.
That just doesn't...
I don't understand what was
either.
going on that night, other than
Cinco de Mayo.
Cinco de Mayo.
Or Montgomery.
Both, probably. So this lady's like, so, do you feel safe at home?
What?
Oh, like, yeah. Like, now, granted,
Where is this going?
this was the first time in my life I had been in a hospital.
Okay, so you didn't know the protocols.
I had no clue what was going on.
Yeah.
Growing up, we literally never went to the hospital.
Yeah.
Ever.
Well,
We did not.
that's probably a subject for another day.
Yeah, it's a subject for another day. Anyways, so I didn't know the protocols. But this girl is sitting there with clipboard asking me if
you
I
feel safe at
safe at home. And I was like, well, that's a really weird question.
Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't I feel safe at home?
Yeah.
And she's like, okay, yeah, okay, blah, blah, blah.
So
do you live alone?
So a social worker was sent
Yeah,
to you
social worker
before a
is-
nurse or doctor or anyone ever saw
Do
you.
you live alone? And I was like, no.
No.
I don't live alone. I'm 16. Why would I live alone? So a lot of these questions, she's like, do you, what did she say? She asked some question to the tune of, do you have any, I think it was do you live alone?
You already said that.
I know. I think that was the question she asked. And I said, no, I have 6 kids. I said, no, I have 5 kids.
Oh, no.
And she just slowly panned up,
Like,
looking at me.
you're
And I was like,
16 and
no, I mean, I have 5 siblings, not 5 kids. And she asked a few questions. And then my parents finally showed up.
And still nothing had happened.
Yeah.
No one had seen you.
No one had seen me. Now, This was before we had cell phones.
Yeah.
My parents had a cell phone, but this was the early days of cell phones. My mom had a cell phone.
Were they like this big?
No, it was like the Nokia.
Okay. All right.
The little Nokias.
The bricks.
The bricks, little bricks. But my parents they didn't like, my dad, and almost until, the end of his life, did not have a cell phone, would not talk to anyone on the phone, nothing. He hated a cell phone.
Yeah.
So.
Can't blame him.
Yeah, he didn't have a phone. And my mom had turned it off at the Shakespeare Festival because they required you.
Yes.
They asked you to turn your phone off.
It's a show.
Now they ask you to silence your phones.
Yeah.
Because people can't live
I'm
without
sure in the early days it didn't have that feature.
them. Yeah.
You had to turn it off.
They just turned it off.
Yeah.
So we had not been able to get in touch with them. Like, my grandmother had been trying to call them. Everybody had been trying to call them to tell them that I was in the hospital and could not get in touch with them. We finally had a cop show up at the house. Followed the ambulance, came to the house, showed up.
Because of the 911 call.
Yeah, because of the 911 call. And he came up and said, "Is there anything I can do?" And my grandmother said, "Yes, you can find their parents. They're at the Shakespeare Festival in Montgomery." And he went, "Okay," and just left. Got it to the Shakespeare Festival, and my parents said that they were in the play, and they started hearing people whispering behind them, going down the line, whispering to people,
searching for someone.
And my mom said she remembered going, "Oh wow, those people are getting pulled out of the theater. Somebody's getting pulled out."
Oh no.
that must be bad.
Yeah, must be bad.
And the closer and closer they got, she realized that she started hearing Kempter.
Oh no.
Kempter. And she said there was like this cold chill went up her spine.
Of course, you think the worst.
Yeah, so they got pulled out, and they walk out the door, and there's a police officer standing there. And their mind starts tripping.
Yeah.
And the police officer, they walk up to the police officer and the police officer says, "There's been an accident."
Oh no, that's the worst way you can start.
It's like, what? Who told them bedside manners?
Right, not that. Yeah,
no one instructed bedside manners. Like, hey, by the way, somebody's cut a finger off. Cut
They're
a finger
okay.
on the
This is
table
what you
saw.
start
They're
with.
perfectly
They're okay.
fine. They're okay.
They're
Everybody's
at the
okay.
hospital.
They've cut it. They had a minor accident. Cut a finger on the table saw. We had to take him to the hospital. Blah blah blah. Nothing. There's been an accident. So that just trips my parents out. They're like
speechless. Like what?
Like, what kind of accident? Trying to in a panic. Well, finally he's like, "Your son has cut his hand off."
Well, for all intents and purposes, you had. I don't know.
I had not cut my hand off. I mean, that's a massive thing. You cut a finger off or you cut a hand off?
You might have had to have an amputation. He didn't know.
So anyways,
he arrived after the EMTs.
Well, he wasn't actually there. It was another guy. So it was the telephone game had gone from cut a finger to cut his hand off by the time it got to Montgomery. So that just freaked my parents out even more.
I'm sure.
So they're like, where is he? And he goes, "Well, he's in Baptist South. Do you know how to get there?" And my dad's like, "Yes." And then he turns to my mom and he says, "Where's Baptist South?" And my mom turns to the police officer and says, Can you take us to Baptist South?" And he's like, "Sure, let's go." So they get a police escort to Baptist South.
Nice.
And that's when they showed up.
Okay.
And they
So
come
you had
walking
just
around.
been sitting there, the social worker had just left.
Yeah, my dad came down the hallway toward me. And at this point in time, this was one of those moments in your life where you grow up.
Yeah. Yeah.
At that point in time, I thought that this injury was tough on me. I was in hour one,
You're like, hey, this is going to change my life.
I was like, this is going to change my life. At that point in time, I was not really... I had played the violin for a week. So I was like, the violin's out. Like, I'm
Yeah.
not going to get to play the violin anymore.
Yeah.
I was worried that I couldn't play tennis. Having one finger would have been really tough. Toss the ball. I had a one-handed backhand, so the backhand was fine. I was worried about tossing and
serving.
Because at this point, I was fully prepared to only have a pointer finger.
Yeah.
With the way it looked.
Yeah.
I saw my dad coming down the hallway, and I, at that point in time, realized that, you know, if I start, I guess, feeling sorry for myself, it's going to make this so much worse.
On him.
Yeah. I hadn't seen my mom yet. Well, my dad was not doing well. And he comes up and he's like, hey, he's like, oh, how you doing? And I was like, I'm good. I was like, I'm doing good. And he was like, and at this point in time, all of a sudden, a nurse walks up with a clipboard and
oh no,
wants him to sign something.
Okay.
We need you to blah, 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 sign blah, blah, blah. So he signs.
So that they can treat you. You're a minor.
Yeah. So it turns out I had been sitting in the hospital for an hour with no one paying attention to me because I was a minor.
Which is the exact opposite of like the
what
policies are
happen.
To protect. Yeah. That's stupid.
So as soon as my dad signed, all of a sudden, you know, the doctor shows up, starts unwrapping my hand, and he unwraps my hand, and my dad I thought my dad was going to pass out.
Oh, jeez.
I mean, it was bad.
There was nothing to prepare him for that.
There was literally nothing to prepare him for that.
You didn't say, hey, Dad, my fingers are hanging off. Like, you're
No.
just like, I'm good.
I was like, I'm good. So he took it off, and the doctor looks at it and goes, well, we're going to lose that ring finger for sure. Blah, 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 blah. Says a few other quick things. And now there's people everywhere.
Oh, suddenly.
An
hour and a half later.
And that was it. They had shot me. Sedated me in the IV.
Oh, put you out, yeah.
And
knocked you out.
I woke up looking down a little tunnel of light. And
that classic hospital shot.
The hospital shot is literally just like that.
Starting to see the light.
Yeah. And as I'm waking up, I'm slowly waking up, slowly realizing what's going on, and my hand was this giant bandage club all the way down to my elbow.
A big club.
And my thumbnail was sticking out. Oh. I don't know why. Like one more piece of gauze and they would have covered up my thumbnail.
Guess it wasn't necessary.
But that much of my thumbnail was sticking out. And all of a sudden I was super happy.
You're like,
I was like, man, if I had my thumb, I was going to have a lot more.
Thumb and pointer. Then you could maybe toss a ball. Yeah.
So I was like super excited. Well, about 5 minutes later, my parents walk in to the nurse brings them in. And I am just on cloud nine. And they're like,
probably from the drugs.
They're like,
that knocked you out.
They're like, why are you so excited?
Pain medicine.
And I was like, man, I got a thumb. I can hitchhike from both sides of the street. No. So we went through the recovery. I think I stayed in hospital for like 4 days. And when I got home, one of the things that everybody was wanting to do was get me back onto music. Because
even though it had just been 1 week.
We had just started, but it was like
less.
this. No, I did care. Everybody cared. It was like super exciting. We were going to play music.
Yeah.
Didn't have any plans to be doing it for a living or playing all over the country or whatever.
Right.
Just
excited to be able to play together. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was kind of like one of those things like you follow the horse, get back on the horse.
Yeah.
So my parents everybody wanted me to not let this thing stop me. Mm-hmm. So I started looking around for other instruments to be able to play.
Yeah.
And the first couple things that we did, my sister who plays the piano, she plays the keyboard, she cut the keyboard in half or programmed it. Half the keys would be the piano, and then the other half would be bass.
Bass, yeah.
So I would sit there and play the bass parts of these songs on the keyboard for a few months. And we decided that because I had these two fingers, that I could play left-handed.
Interesting that they weren't like, drums are for you. You can hold
I don't know. Like there were
your club hand.
There were other things that I could have played. Like I could have played the steel guitar. Could have played that.
Yeah.
Could have played the trumpet.
So whose idea was the bass? Is it because you had already been?
Well, we kind of needed the bass for the music that we were playing.
For what you were doing.
Like I'm not sure why no one had immediately gotten a bass. Because
interesting.
We needed it.
Yeah.
And this was also like 3 or 4 months into it. We were like, oh, we're going to kind of, play a little music. So we need a bass because you always have to have a bass.
Yeah.
My great uncle, the guy I'd been visiting with the cello, was so shocked at how I had handled the situation.
Yeah.
I have never seen anyone look at me like he looked at me when they came in the hospital.
Oh, were they
visit.
there with
They
your...
were still there.
Yeah, okay. They decided to extend their stay?
No, they didn't extend their stay. They were only going to be there for like 4 or 5 days.
Okay.
So this happened like the first day they were there.
Oh, my goodness.
So they came back to visit the next day, and he came in the room, and he sat down, and he was staring at me, totally perplexed at why I was in a good mood. Because the 4 days that I had in the hospital were some of the most fun days I've ever had in my life. We had a blast.
It was the morphine, wasn't it?
It definitely was the morphine. I actually got off all the pain medication on like day 2.
Holy moly.
Because I couldn't watch movies.
They were all
We also
too
didn't
trippy.
have a TV or watch any movies.
At home?
At home.
Oh, so yeah.
So this was the time to watch movies,
like,
right? So I'm watching movies. Well, morphine would make my eyes cross. And I could not focus on anything.
And you're like, this is my one chance to watch TV.
So I got off pain medication so I could watch TV.
Oh, my goodness.
I had, nerve damage and just cut, fingers gone, and I wanted to watch TV. So I got off pain medication. All right. So my uncle turned around, went back to California, and sent the cello the next day.
Wow. Shipped it?
Sent it with my grandparents.
Oh, okay. I was like, whew.
His sister. One of my sisters picked up the cello and started playing it, so we had this kind of, this band starting to kind of solidify a little bit. And then it was important for everybody that we play music because, that was the thing that I was trying to do when I cut my hand.
Yeah.
So I cut my hand in May. In August, I finally got the last pin out of my hand. I had 3 pins in my hand. And the process of that healing time was very, very difficult in that I couldn't do much.
Yeah.
I had...
Well, you're learning to function as a one hand,
Yeah. So I got bored very quickly. And then I tried to
That's never good for you.
No, this is terrible for me. So I sat there and emailed people all day long. This was before Facebook.
Oh, my.
I had, a lot of relatives around the country trying to send notes and encourage me or whatever. And so I just emailed people with one hand all day long, all day for days and days and days, just sitting there, just emailing back and forth, just talking to people. We didn't have Facebook. I don't even think Facebook had been invented at that point. And so coming out of that, August on my birthday, finally got a bass in, the left-handed bass.
Okay. Because you had to order it special.
Yeah, I had a special order it from Fender because they don't keep left-handed basses.
Mm-hmm.
And I began at that point in time to learn how to play the bass left-handed.
Which there are no tutorial videos.
Yeah, there's not many tutorials or instructional stuff on how to play left-handed.
Especially not at that point. I mean, the personal computer was still brand new thought. Like,
What?
you were 15.
The personal computer
Yeah.
had been around forever.
I'm not talking about the big old, like, type thingy.
You were trying to date me back to a dinosaur. We had a MacBook.
Oh, wow.
A MacBook Pro.
Really?
Yes.
Man. Okay.
Yes, YouTube was around, quite populated, millions of videos.
It's still dial up, though, right?
No.
Yes, it was.
It was not
You were
dial-up.
15, 16.
No, it was
Dial-up.
not dial-up. No. We did not have dial-up.
You
We had
never
wireless.
You had wireless.
Yes, it was Wi-Fi. We had
I
Wi-Fi
doubt
in our
that.
house.
We're going to have to go back and see.
We did not go around plugging our computers into landlines. We did not do that.
You never did that?
Yes, back in the day when I was like 7.
Huh. I guess you were more advanced than my family.
Yeah, your family still doesn't have any internet. You still have to go to the one window in the house and sit there with your phone out the window to get
for a
one
bar.
bar. I'm not sure why it only works in that
true.
one window.
All right, yeah.
Anyways,
Okay. So,
so
you learned to play left-handed bass
I learned to play left-handed
by
bass.
yourself.
Yeah, because my dad had played bass previously, and he went to teach me how to play. So he'd pick up my bass and he'd,
Yeah, no. Yeah, if you play an instrument one way, you just can't.
It doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't translate.
It doesn't translate because you think
It's like learning a different language.
you have to think the scales in the music
Mm-hmm.
on left-handed. You kind of think where you associate very quickly the scale in your mind, and if you flip that around, it makes no sense.
Yeah.
None whatsoever.
Yeah.
Up is
Just
down.
like right-handed would make no
Yeah.
sense to you now. Like,
Yeah, it makes no sense. So I struggled through that and finally, learned how to play left-handed. So when people see me play left-handed, at first glance they just assume that I'm on the rare occasion
oddball
left-handed bass player. And then if they do get close enough and see my hand, then they're like, "What?
yeah.
He's missing a finger." So my dad, but that whole process of my dad had a very, very hard time. My mom, my mom didn't take it quite as hard as my dad did. My dad struggled. He, couldn't understand why God had let it happen. And had really, really struggled with it for a few months, and then came to peace about it, and wrote a song. It's like one of our first songs that we played, and for me personally, I at that point in time realized that in this life we have struggles. We go through really terrible things sometimes.
Yeah.
And sometimes those things have nothing whatsoever to do with you. It has everything to do with how other people see you handle it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Job did nothing wrong. Job was wrung through the ringer, however you want to say that. He was put through the ringer.
Yeah.
Suffered horrible things. And, his friends were telling him, well, this, that, and the other thing, you've sinned
must have
against,
done this,
you must
yeah.
have done this, you must have done that. And he was like, I haven't really done anything. I'm pretty good. And then, it turned out to be not about him.
Right.
And I think
it was more about his faithfulness.
His testimony of his faithfulness. And to be able to persevere through that struggle.
Yeah. And has helped
many
people, countless
people
in
hearing that story.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point in time, that kind of became clear to me, because at first I was like, what? Why did I have to get my hand cut off?
Yeah.
But I didn't struggle with it very long. I just immediately was like, this is what happened.
The most depressing thing was you not being able to do anything for that period of time where you were recovering.
I mean, it didn't last very long. I was out playing tennis like 3 days. I was out playing tennis the day I got out of the hospital. My doctor hated me.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I had 3 pins in my hand. So he was like, I'd come into
screw something up. Like,
I'd come into the...
You could lose your hand.
To the office, after my weekly checkup or whatever, and he would be like, what? You went out and played soccer this week? He's like, do you understand what happens if you trip and fall on your hand? I was like, oh yeah, I'll be fine. About 3 weeks, he was like, I'd walk in and he'd go, I do not want to know what you did. Don't even tell me. It's your own fault if you hurt yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was, I think what I got out of it the most was that, it's not all about you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're going to have trouble. You're going to have traumatic things that happen to you. But if you can, people are watching how you react to it.
Yeah.
Because everyone is going through tough times.
Yeah.
But if you can give them a little bit of hope that, you're going to be all right, and you can point the way to glorify God through it, and put your hope and your trust in the fact that, God is in control and he has a plan for you, that it really means a lot to people. Yeah. And it really can impact someone else.
It does.
And it make a difference in somebody else's life. And, you just might be along for it. Because it really was not a big deal for me.
It still isn't. It doesn't hinder you one bit.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't stop me at all. I don't even notice. Yeah. I don't notice anything different from what I was in the past. But I do know for a fact that little injury completely changed my life and my family's life.
Yeah.
We would not be here doing what we were doing if I hadn't done that. Our lives would have looked completely different. That one little instance just completely diverted our whole family's track.
Yeah.
And a lot of really amazing things have come out of that happening.
Yeah.
So
it's good to not dwell on what you've lost, but what became of that terrible circumstance God used for good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you believe that God is in control of your circumstances, and instead of having a bad attitude about what happened, try to realize that maybe there is a plan here, and maybe you need to try to figure out how do you make the best of it.
Right.
Amazing things can happen.
Don't miss that opportunity. Yeah.
Because there's always opportunity in that. There's more opportunity in that than every, day great living.
Than your day-to-day normal happy living. Oh. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
It's good. Well, I think the baby's waking up, so we need to call it close for a day.
Yeah, it's we are podcast number 1. This is probably an hour and a half long podcast. And if you listen to it this long,
we're sorry.
Yeah, we're really sorry. But
I almost fell asleep a couple of times.
I know, you're really yawning. But if you want to know why I play left-handed and what happened to my hand, this is
the whole story.
This is the unabridged version.
Yeah. All right, thanks.
Subscribe. Watch some music videos.
They're way more interesting.
They're way more interesting than this. A lot of fun. And I have some ideas for that. So maybe some behind the scenes videos of some of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of explaining. The Orange Blossom special video is our most viewed. I think it has 8 million views.
Mm-hmm.
There's a funny story behind that. I may tell that one. But no, this is fun. I like this. Comment below or whatever. Do something. I don't know. See ya.